Hello students, welcome to EPG Pathshala. I am Dr. Renu Tyagi from Department of Anthropology, University of Delhi. Today we will be discussing on the module Evolution of Human Society from the paper Human Origin and Evolution. The learning objectives of the module are to study the history of the human society and to study the evolution of human society. Now let's have an introduction about the topic. Man is a social animal. Human being or Homo sapiens cannot live alone. They live in either small groups, large groups, communities or societies. We human beings as a species are social beings who exist in the company of our fellow beings. We organize ourselves into various kinds of the social groupings such as the nomadic, bands, villages, cities and countries in which we work, trade, play, reproduce and interact in many other ways. Unlike other species, human beings combine socialization with deliberate change in the social behavior and organization over time. Consequently, the pattern of the human society differ from place to place and era to era and across the culture, making the social world a very complex and the dynamic environment. The processes of the intensification, integration and stratification which lead to the transformation of human societies are due to the interconnected processes of technological change and population growth which are the engine of the social change. Now let's have a look at the history of human society. There are archaeological evidences that our ancestors lived in the groups and shared whatever prey they hunted or food they gathered. In a way, it can be said that they lived in the groups or in the unordered society. With passage of time, human societies have evolved from the unsettled to the settled, hunting and gathering to the agrarian, and from agrarian to the industrial societies. There are many factors responsible for the evolution of the human society. For example, social evolution, biological evolution, socio-cultural evolution, evolution of the technology, evolution of the socio-cultural psychology, etc. In evolutionary biology, there are different forces that act for the evolution of humans. The forces are namely the Hardy-Weinberg principle, mutation, gene migration or gene flow, genetic drift, recombination and natural selection. This is despite the social mechanism responsible for the development and maintenance of the societies among human beings which had fascinated and intrigued the philosophers and scientists since time immemorial. The first consideration of the evolution of the human appeared in The Origin of Species written by Darwin. After more than 2 decades of the theoretical appearance of the human evolution, Darwin turned to the evolution of the human societies. Darwin in his book The Descent of Man stressed about the differences between the human and animals, in which he attributed the important difference to the moral sense or the conscience displayed by the human beings. According to evolution, humans are benefited by the mutual assistance among the groups which is in tandems with the modern theories of the social. So, Darwin's holistic view of the biological adaptation, in which he always included the theoretical concepts of the social behavior, were eclipsed by the growth of the other biological disciplines. There are several key aspects of the human society which the cultural effect on the human behavior, the organization and the behavior of the group, the processes of the social change, social trade-offs, form of political and economic organization, mechanism for resolving the conflict among groups and individuals, and national and international social system. There are many factors responsible for the evolution of human society. Now let's understand the evolution of the society among the Stone Age humans. Archaeological evidences and remnants pointed that even the Stone Age humans settled in the permanent communities and adopted the complex economic and social system thousands of years before agriculture was practiced. These evidences are the hottest topic as it superseded the prevailing notion that Stone Age forager as the nomadic people who lived hand to mouth in small egalitarian bands. This image was too enforced by the present day examples of the hunter-gatherers like the Bushmen of the Kalahari Desert. There are also archaeological evidences found in all parts of the world. Some of the findings are the beads and the pendants found in the Western Europe, believed to be existent 32,000 years ago, which are manufactured by the standardized methods and believed to be worn by the social identity. There are also settlements of the mammoth Benz houses in the central Russia dating back to around 20,000 years ago, and evidences of the elaborate villages occupied by the Middle Foragers nearly 13,000 years ago. In a way, prehistoric hunter-gatherers were much more diverse and highly organized than has been thought and perceived. They fully displayed the characteristics of the formally regulated society. The pre-agricultural forager also developed the banking system in which the food surplus were stored. This is evident from the earlier writings in the Bible where Joseph creates a long-term agriculture policy and infrastructure. They traded the goods over the long distances, fashioned a burgeoning number and variety of tools and implement and produced luxury items, ceramics and arts. There was further cultural intensification of all these activities with the development of the agriculture. Therefore, in a way, agriculture intensified cultural advancement could be seen. Now let's understand some of the cultural effect on the behavior. Human behavior is affected both by the genetic inheritance and by the experience. The way in which the people develop are shaped by the social experience and circumstances within the context of their inherited genetic potential. Each person is born into a social and the cultural setting, family, community, social class, language, religion, and eventually developed many social connections. The way a child thinks or behaves is affected by the characteristics of the child's social setting, affects how he or she learns to think and behave by means of the instructions, rewards and punishment and examples. This setting includes the home, school, neighborhood and also perhaps the local religious and the law enforcement agencies. Then there are also the child's mostly informal interactions with the friends, other peers, relatives and the entertainment and new media. How individuals will respond to all these influences or even which influence will be most potent tend not to be predictable. There is, however, some substantial similarity in how individuals respond to same pattern of the influences, that is to being raised in the same culture. Furthermore, culturally induced behavior patterns such as the speech patterns, body language and form of humors become so deeply embedded in the human mind that they often operate without the individual themselves being fully aware of them. Now let's see the behavior of a group. In addition to belonging to the social and the cultural setting into which they are born, people voluntarily join groups based on the shared occupation, belief or interest, such as union, political parties or clubs. Membership in these groups influenced how people think of themselves and how others think of expectations and rules that makes the behavior of member more predictable and that enables each group to function smoothly and retain its identity. The rule may be informal and conveyed by examples such as how to behave at a social gathering, or they may be written rules and they are strictly enforced. Formal groups often signal the kind of behavior that favor by means of rewards and the punishment. Affiliation with any social group, whether one joins it voluntarily or is born into it, brings some advantages of the larger numbers, the potential for pooling the resources such as money or labor, concerted effort such as the strikes, boycotts or voting, and identity and recognition such as the organization, emblem or attention from the media. Within each group, the members' attitudes, which often include an image of their group as being superior to others, help ensure cohesion within the group but can also lead to the serious conflict with other groups. Attitude toward other groups are likely to involve the stereotyping or treating all the members of a group as though they were the same and perceiving in those people's actual behavior only those qualities that fit the observerly perceptions. Such social prejudice may include the blind respect for some categories of the people such as the doctors or clergy, as well as the blind disrespect for the other categories of the people who are, say, the foreign born or women. Now let's have a look at the societal changes. Societies, like species, evolve in the direction that are opened or constrained in part by internal forces, such as the technological developments or political tradition. The conditions of one generation limits and shape the range of the possibilism open to the next. On the one hand, such near generation learns the society's cultural forms and thus does not have to reinvent the strategies for producing the food, handling the conflict, educating the younger ones, governing, and so forth. It also learns aspirations for how society can be maintained and improved. On the other hand, each new generation must address unresolved problems from the generation before, tension that may lead to the war, wide-scale drug abuse, poverty and deprivation, racism, and a multitude of private and group grievances. Grievances may be relieved just enough to make the people tolerable them, or they may overflow into the revolution against the structure of the society itself. Many societies continue to perpetuate centuries-old dispute with other over the boundaries, religion, and deeply felt belief about the past wrongs. Government generally attempts to engineer the social change by means of the policies, law, incentives, or the coercion. Sometimes these efforts work effectively and actually make it possible to avoid such conflict. At the other time, they may perpetuate the conflict. For example, the setting up the agricultural communes in the Soviet Union against the farmer wishes to form their own private lands was achieved only with the armed forces and the loss of the million of the life. The liberation of the slave in the United States came only as the consequences of a bloody civil war. 100 years later, elimination of the explicit racial segregation was achieved in some places only by the use of legislative actions, court injunctions, and armed military guard, and continues to be a major social issue. There are some external factors including the war, migration, colonial domination, imported ideas, technology or plague, and natural disaster also shape the way in which each society evolves. Now let's have a look at the size of the human population. The size of the human population, its concentration in particular places, and its pattern of growth are influenced by the physical setting and by many aspects of the culture, economics, politics, technology, history, and religion. In response to the economic concerns, national governments set very different policies, some to reduce the population growth, some to increase it. Some religious groups also take a strong stand on the population issues. Leaders of the Roman Catholic Church, for example, have long campaigned against the birth control, whereas in recent years, the religious leaders of the other major faiths have endorsed the use of birth control to restrict the family size. In turn, social systems are influenced by the population, its size, its rate of change, and its proportion of people with different characteristics such as the age, sex, and language. Great increase in the size of a population require greater job specialization, new government responsibilities, new kind of institutions, and the need to marshal a more complex distribution of resources. Population patterns, particularly when they are changes, are also influenced in changing the social priorities. The greater the variety of the subculture, the more diverse is the provision that have to be made for them. As the size of a social group increases, so may be its influence on the society. The influence may be though marked, such as the young people who as a group buy more athletic equipments, or the voting power. For example, old people are less likely to vote for the school bond legislations, or recognition of the need by social planners. For example, the more mothers who work outside the home will require child care program. Now let's understand the concept of social trade-offs. Choices among the alternative benefits and costs are unavoidable for individual or for the group. To gain something we want or need, it is usually necessary to give up something we already have, or at least give up an opportunity to have gained something also instead. For example, the more the public spends as a whole on the government funded projects such as the highways and school, the less it can spend on the defense if it has already decided not to increase the revenue or the debt. Social trade-offs are not always economic or material. Sometimes they arise from choice between our private rights and the public goods. Laws concerning cigarette smoking in public places, cleaning up after pets, and highway speed limits, for instance, restrict the individual freedom of some people for the benefit of others. Or choices may arise between aesthetics and utility. For example, a proposed large-scale apartment complex may be welcomed by the prospective tenants but opposed by the people who already live in the neighborhood. Political and economic systems. In most of the world's countries, national power and authority are allocated to various individuals and groups through politics, usually by the means of the compromises between the conflicting interests. Through politics, government are elected or appointed, or in some cases created by the armed forces. Government have the power to make, interpret and enforce the rules and decisions that determine how countries are run. The rules that government make encompasses a wide range of human affairs including commerce, education, marriage, medical care, employment, military service, relation, travel, scientific research and the exchange of ideas. A national government, or in some cases a state or local government, is usually given responsibility for services that individual or private organization are believed not to be able to perform well themselves. The US Constitution, for example, requires the federal government to perform only a few such functions: the delivery of the mail, the taking of the census, the minting of the money, and military defense. However, the increasing size and the complexity of the US society has led to a vast expansion of the government activities. Today, the government is directly involved in such areas as education, welfare, civil rights, scientific research, weather prediction, transportation, preservation of the national resources such as national parks, and much more. Decision about the responsibilities that national, state and the local government should have are negotiated among the government officials who are influenced by their constituencies and by the center of the power such as the corporations, the military, agricultural interest and labor union. The political and economic system of the nation differ in many ways, including the means of pricing goods and services, the sources of the capital for the new ventures, government regulating limits on the profits, the collecting, spending and the controlling of the money, and the relationship of the manager and worker to each other and to the government. The political system of a nation is closely intertwined with its economic system, referring to the economic activity of individual and group at every level. Now let's have a look at the social conflict. All the human societies always have been festooned with the conflict between the individual, group and so on. And all societies have their own system for regulating it. Conflict between the people or the group often arises from the competition for the resources, power and status. Family members compete for the attention. Individuals compete for the job and the wealth. Nation compete for the territory and prestige. Different interest groups compete for the influence and the power to make rules. Often the competition is not for the resources but for the ideas. One person or the group wants to have the ideas or the behavior of another group suppressed, punished or declared illegal. Conflict also adds to the rise of a new society which may be due to the displacement or the dispersion. Now let's understand technology and human society. Technologies also played a major role in the human behavior. The high value placed on the new technological invention in many parts of the world has led to increasingly rapid and inexpensive communication and travel, which in turn has led to the rapid spread of the fashion and ideas in clothing, food, music, and forms of recreation. Books, magazines, radio, social networking sites, and television describe ways to dress, raise children, make money, find happiness, get married, cook, and build relationship. They also implicitly promote the values, aspirations, and priorities by the way they portray the behavior of the people, such as children, parents, teachers, politicians, and athletes, and the attitude they display towards the violence, sex, minorities, the role of the men and the women, and lawfulness. The revolution in the internet-based technology have to some extent impacted on the way of life and behavior in the society. This has turned the world into a global village where information, whether good or bad, can now be shared within the seconds of time. Now let's have a look at the Spencer theory of the social evolution. As stated by the Spencer, the underlying of all the evolutions are number 1, movement from the simple to the complex, and number 2, movement from the homogeneous to the heterogeneous. Spencer utilized both physical and the biological evolution to explain his theory of the social evolution. According to his principle of biological evolution, those creatures who survived in the struggle for existence are the ones who are able to make effective adjustment with changing circumstances. Thus, in a way, the society is moving from the homogeneous to the heterogeneous structure, and the society is also moving from indefinite to definite stage. Likewise, Spencer applied the concept of the biological evolution in the cultural perspective and carried on to indicate that those cultures survives which are able to adjust themselves with the changing circumstances. If a civilization is unable to make adjustment with the changing circumstances, it caves in and gradually becomes extinct. The Spencer's theory of the social evolution point out to the 2 stages, the movement from the simple to the compound societies and change from the militant society to the industrial society. The movement from simple to the compound society is seen in 4 types of societies in terms of the evolutionary level. Those are the number 1, simple society. Spencer defined the simple society as one which forms a single working whole, unsubjected to any other, and of which the part cooperate with or without a regulating center for certain public ends. These societies were predominantly small, nomadic, and lacking in stable relationship structure. They had low degrees of the differentiation, specialization, and integration. Their examples are Eskimos, the Fijians, Guinea tribes, the New Caledonians, and the Pueblo Indians. Now let's have a look at the second society, that is compound society. Compound societies were presented as having the generally come about through either a peaceful or a violent merger of the 2 or more simple societies. They tended to be predominantly settled agricultural societies, although a majority are mainly pastoral and tending to be characterized by a division of 4 or the 5 social strata and an organized priestly group. They are also characterized by industrial societies that show in advancing division of the labor, general and local. Example are the Teutonic people in the 5th century, the Hometic Greeks, New Zealanders, Hottentots, Dahomans and Ashantis. Now let's have a look at the third category, that is doubly compound societies. The doubly compound societies were completely settled, were much more integrated and a larger and more definite political structure, a religious hierarchy, a more or less rigid caste system and more complex division of labor. Furthermore, in such societies, to a greater and the lesser extent, customs has passed into positive law and religious observances have grown definite, rigid and complex. Towns and roads have become general and considerable progress in knowledge and the art has taken place. Some of the examples are the 13th century France, 11th century England and Spartan Confederacy, the ancient Peruvians and the Guatemalans. Now let's come to the fourth category, that is trebly compound society. It includes the great civilized nations such as the Assyrian Empire, the modern Great Britain, France, Germany, Italy and Russia. Spencer does not outline their traits in details but point to their increased overall size, complexity, division of labor, population density, integration and general cultural complexity. Changes from the military society to the industrial society need to be understood. According to the Spencer, the evolution process from military society to the industrial society has taken place. The type of the social structure depends on the relation of a society to other societies in its significant characteristics. The military society is characterized by the compulsory cooperation while the industrial society is based on the voluntarily cooperation. The military society has a centralized government whereas the industrial society has a decentralized government. According to him, the military society has economic autonomy but it is not found in the industrial society. Number fourth, there is a domination of the state over all other social organization in a military society, whereas in the industrial society, the function of the state are very much limited. The Spencer's theory of the social evolution is a master key to the riddles of the universe. However, there are criticisms made by some of the social thinkers. The criticisms are: number one, according to some social thinkers, Herbert Spencer's theory lacks practicability. It is not practical and realistic. Even today, there are several tribes and aborigines that do not show any sign of evolution. Number two, this theory also lacks uniformity. It is not possible to have a uniform pattern of the social evolution in all societies because the factors and the circumstances responsible for the evolution differ from one another. Mere survival for existence is not enough for men. In human society, qualities like sympathy, sacrifice, kindness, love, etc. are also present. These are quite different from the struggle for existence. Now let's have a look at the summary of the module. The archaeological evidences and remnants pointed out that even the Stone Age humans settled in the permanent communities and adopted complex economic and social systems thousands of years before agriculture was practiced. In a way, humans as social animals organize into various kinds of social groupings such as nomadic bands, village, cities and countries in which they work, trade, play, reproduce and interact in many other ways. Subsequently, the pattern of the human society differs from place to place and era to era and across the culture, making the social world a very complex and dynamic environment. There are archaeological evidences that our ancestors lived in the groups and shared whatever prey they hunted or the food they gathered. With the passage of time, human societies have evolved from the unsettled to the settled, hunting and gathering to the agrarian, and from agrarian to the industrial societies. There are many factors responsible for the evolution of human societies, viz. Social evolution, biological evolution, socio-cultural evolution, evolution of the technology, evolution of the socio-cultural psychology. The first consideration of the evolution of the humans appeared in The Origin of Species by Darwin in 1859. After more than 2 decades of the theoretical appearance of the human evolution, Darwin turned to the evolution of human societies. There are several key aspects of the human society, which culture effect on human behavior, the organization and the behavior of the groups, the processes of the social change, social trades-off, forms of the political and economic organization, mechanism for resolving the conflict among groups and individual, and national and international social system. Human behavior is affected both by the genetic inheritance and by the experience. In addition to the belonging to the social and the cultural setting into which they are born, people voluntarily join groups based on the shared occupations, beliefs or interest. Membership in these groups influences how people think of themselves and how others think of them. These groups impose expectations and rules that make the behavior of the member more predictable and that enables each group to function smoothly and retain its identity. Affiliation with any social group, whether one joins it voluntarily or is born into it, brings some advantages of the larger number, the potential for the pooling resources, concerted effort, and identity and recognition. Societies like these species evolve in the direction that are opened or constrained in part by the internal forces such as the technological development or political tradition. The condition of one generation limits and shape the range of the possibilities open to the next. On the one hand, each new generation learns the cultural norms of the society and thus does not have to reinvent the strategies for producing the food, handling the conflicts, educating the younger ones, governing and so forth. The size of the human population, its concentration in a particular place and its pattern of growth are influenced by the physical setting and by many aspects of the culture, economics, politics, technology, history and religion. In response to the economic concerns, national government set very different policies, some to reduce the population growth and some to increase it. Some religious groups also take strong stand on the population issues. In turn, social systems are influenced by the population, its size, its rate of change and its proportion of the people with different characteristics like age, sex and the language. Spencer applied the concept of the biological evolution in the cultural perspective and carried on to indicate that those cultures survive which are able to adjust with the changing circumstances. If a civilization is unable to make the adjustment with the changing circumstances, it caves in and gradually becomes extinct. Thank you.